glass tower stood against Chicago's winter sky like a shard of ice, 60 stories of steel and ambition wrapped in windows that reflected nothing but cold. At
I can't
8:04
believe
in the
you did
morning,
this!
Calm
every
down, it was
light
just a
inside
mistake.
Hale
A mistake!
Dynamics
This is a
went down.
disaster!
Victoria Hale stood in the lobby, her phone's flashlight beam cutting through blackness thick enough to feel solid. Around her, the building that bore her father's name had become a tomb. Somewhere above in the shaft between floors, 6 and 723 people were trapped in an elevator with no heat, no light, and no way out. The temperature outside read 4 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind was hitting 40 miles per hour. The worst blizzard in 17 years had turned Lake Michigan into a wall of white that swallowed the shoreline whole. Garrett Holloway appeared at her elbow, his own flashlight dancing across marble floors. His voice carried the careful control of a man delivering news he knew would detonate. The primary grid is down. Backup core isn't responding. Victoria's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed level. Emotion was a luxury she'd trained herself not to afford. The Meridian Capital team lands at O'Hare in 90 minutes. The meeting starts at noon. No exceptions. Garrett's silence said what his mouth wouldn't. Behind them, Sandra Keene moved through the darkness with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 6 years learning to anticipate disaster before it arrived. Her tablet screen glowed blue against her face. The shutdown wasn't triggered by the storm. Someone used a physical override on the auxiliary power node in Sub 2. It's an electromechanical lock, can't be undone remotely. Someone has to go down there and disengage it by hand. Victoria processed this in the time it took her heart to beat twice. She already knew the question she had to ask, and she already hated the answer. Who knows that system? Garrett's face did something uncomfortable. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, opened. Brooks. Daniel Brooks designed the redundancy architecture on that node when he came on 4 years ago. He's the only one who's ever worked on it directly. The name hit Victoria like a fist to the sternum, but she didn't let it show. She stood perfectly still, her hand steady on her phone, her breathing controlled. Inside, something cracked. My team has the documentation, Garrett continued, but the documentation is on servers that are currently offline. Victoria didn't respond. She was already calculating. 8 minutes ago, she'd stood in this same lobby and terminated Marcus Reed's employment. 8 minutes ago, she'd watched him walk out the front door with his 8-year-old daughter crying into his shoulder. 8 minutes ago, she'd made a decision based on protocol and policy, and the kind of rigid certainty her father had taught her was the only way to survive at the top. Now the only person who could save her company was in a parking structure trying to start his truck. Sandra's voice cut through the math Victoria was doing in her head. You have to ask him back. 3 words. Simple. Impossible. Victoria turned toward the glass doors. Through the blowing snow, she could barely make out the dark shapes of vehicles in the outdoor lot. The wind had turned the world into static white noise that erased everything beyond 20 feet. She didn't reach for her coat. There wasn't time for that kind of consideration. She pushed through the doors, and the cold hit her like a physical blow. 4 degrees felt like knives on exposed skin. The wind shoved her sideways, and she had to lean into it just to move forward. Her blazer was made for boardrooms, not blizzards. Within 10 seconds, her hands had gone numb. The parking structure was 300 yards away. She made it in under 2 minutes, her dress shoes slipping on ice she couldn't see under the accumulated snow. Her breath came in short gasps that turned to frost before they left her mouth. She found the blue F-150 in spot C-14. The engine was running. Through the fogged windows, she could make out 2 shapes. Marcus in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead at nothing. In the back, Emma was buckled into her booster seat, already absorbed in whatever was on her tablet screen. Victoria knocked on the window. Marcus turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. For 3 seconds, he just looked at her. Then he rolled the window down. Heat rolled out of the cab, and Victoria felt it on her frozen face like a benediction she didn't deserve. The building lost full power 8 minutes ago. Marcus said nothing. He just listened. Backup systems are non-responsive. There are 23 people in an elevator between 6 and 7. The heat is already off. Still nothing. His eyes stayed on her face, steady and evaluating. Not angry, not sympathetic, just watching. The shutdown was manual. Sub 2, the override node you built. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not emotion, but the kind of instant recalibration that came from years of diagnosing broken systems under pressure. What's the ambient in the basement? The question caught her off guard. She'd expected resistance negotiation, maybe even satisfaction at watching her forced into this position. Instead, he was already working the problem. I don't know. Is the service stair accessible? As far as I know. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror. Emma had looked up from her tablet, her gray eyes fixed on her father's face with the kind of attention that came from knowing when something was wrong. Daddy, give me a second bug. He turned back to Victoria. The wind howled between them, and she realized her hands were shaking. Not from cold, from something she didn't have a name for yet. I'm going to need you to stay with my daughter. The words landed like a physical impact. Victoria's mind went blank for half a beat, then kicked back into gear with a lurch that felt like falling. I can't. I'm not leaving her alone in a parking structure in a blizzard. His voice was calm, final. He wasn't negotiating. You asked me to come back. That's the condition. Victoria looked past him at Emma, who was watching her now with the kind of steady, unblinking assessment that 8-year-olds deployed when they'd decided to evaluate whether an adult was worth trusting. The little girl's orange coat was zipped to her chin. Her hands were folded in her lap. She looked small and solid and completely certain about something Victoria couldn't read. The calculation took less than a second. 23 people in a dead elevator. A $2.1 billion deal that would evaporate if the building stayed dark. An entire company on the edge of a cliff. Against that, her pride, her discomfort, her complete lack of preparation for spending time alone with a child. There wasn't really a choice. Fine. Marcus was out of the truck in 4 seconds. He opened the back door and crouched to Emma's level, speaking quietly enough that Victoria couldn't hear over the wind. Emma nodded twice, her expression serious. Marcus pointed at Victoria. Emma's gaze swiveled, and Victoria felt herself being reassessed with the same thorough scrutiny she'd deploy on a quarterly earnings report. Marcus straightened and turned to Victoria. She doesn't like strangers touching her stuff. Don't offer food unless she asks. If she gets upset, don't tell her to calm down. Just talk slow and keep your voice flat. Victoria nodded once. Marcus pulled his collar up and walked toward the building entrance without looking back. His gait was steady, purposeful, the walk of someone who'd trained himself not to waste motion. Within seconds, the blowing snow had turned him into a shadow, then into nothing at all. Victoria climbed into the driver's seat. The door shut behind her, cutting off the wind. The sudden quiet felt overwhelming. Emma stared at her from the back seat. He said, "You're the mean lady." Victoria's spine straightened reflexively, but she caught the defensive response before it left her mouth. He said that, "No, I said that. He said you made a decision you might want to change." The precision of the phrasing was startling. Emma spoke like someone considerably older than 8, her diction careful, and her meaning exact. Victoria recognized the pattern, a child who'd learned early that words mattered, that clarity was a form of control when everything else felt uncertain. The silence stretched. Victoria had no script for this. She ran a company worth billions. She negotiated with hedge funds and private equity firms. She sat across from men twice her age who'd spent decades perfecting the art of intimidation, and she never blinked. But sitting in a truck with a child whose father she'd just fired and then begged for help, she had absolutely no idea what to say. Emma went back to her tablet. The quiet settled into something almost comfortable, broken only by the rumble of the engine and the occasional gust of wind that rocked the truck on its suspension. Victoria's phone buzzed. Sandra. Elevator's still locked. HVAC is offline. We've got emergency lighting on maybe 40% of the building. How long until Marcus gets us back online? I don't know. The Meridian team is asking whether to proceed to the building or rebook flights. Victoria closed her eyes. The math was brutal. If the building stayed dark, the deal died. If the deal died, the board would have the ammunition they'd been stockpiling for 3 years, proof that James Hale's daughter wasn't capable of filling her father's shoes. Patricia Moss would call for a vote within a week. Victoria would be out by the end of the month. "Tell them to proceed. We'll be ready." She ended the call and let her head fall back against the headrest. Through the windshield, the Hale Dynamics Tower was a dark silhouette against the white sky. Her father had built that building. He'd started with nothing, a degree from a state school and a toolbox he'd inherited from his own father, and turned it into an empire. When he died 3 years ago, he'd left her everything. The company, the legacy, the impossible weight of living up to a man who'd never once told her she was good enough. "You fired my dad this morning." Emma's voice was quiet but clear. Victoria opened her eyes and met the little girl's gaze in the rearview mirror. "Yes." "Why?" The question was simple. The answer wasn't. "He violated a safety protocol. I have rules for a reason." Emma considered this with the seriousness of a judge reviewing evidence. Rules aren't always right. Victoria felt something twist in her chest. She'd spent 3 years convincing herself that rigid adherence to policy was the only way to prove she belonged in her father's office. That exceptions led to chaos. That strength meant never wavering. Sometimes they're all we have. Emma's eyes stayed on her face, reading something Victoria wasn't sure she wanted examined. "My dad says rules are tools. Tools are supposed to help you build things. If they're breaking things instead, you're using them wrong." The words landed with the force of a verdict. Victoria looked away, her throat tight. 2 hours earlier, she'd been standing in her office reviewing Marcus Reed's personnel file for the 5th time. The safety audit report had been unambiguous, unauthorized bypass of lockout protocol on Unit 7B during routine maintenance. The kind of violation that couldn't be ignored without setting a precedent that would undermine every safety standard in the building. Except Marcus had documented his reasoning. 3 pages of detailed technical analysis explaining why the lockout protocol would have caused a cascading failure in the heating system during a cold snap that had already stressed the infrastructure to its limits. His bypass had been surgical, calculated, and ultimately correct. The system had held. No one had been put at risk. The alternative would have left 2 floors without heat for 6 hours. She'd read his documentation. She'd understood it. And then she'd fired him anyway because admitting he'd been right would have meant admitting she didn't have all the answers. It would have meant showing weakness. And weakness was the one thing her father had taught her she could never afford. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Garrett. "Reed is in sub 2. Found the override node. There's a problem." Victoria's pulse spiked. She typed back, "What kind of problem?" "Call me." She hit dial. Garrett picked up on the first ring. "Someone installed a relay device on the override node. It's wired into the secondary bus. If Marcus just disengages the override, the relay will interpret it as unauthorized reversal and send a shutdown signal to the HVAC master controller." Victoria's mind raced through the implications. The heating system is the only thing still running. Exactly. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. This wasn't random. Who has sub-2 clearance? That's the question I'm trying not to answer. Victoria's grip tightened on the phone. Garrett. I pulled the access logs. There were 4 entries in the last 72 hours. 2 were Marcus running standard maintenance checks. 1 was Beverly Marsh doing a routine inspection Wednesday afternoon. He paused. The 4th was last night at 11:47. Executive Operations Suite. Richard Cole's keycard. The name hit Victoria like ice water. Richard Cole had been with Hale Dynamics for 16 years. He'd worked alongside her father through every major deal, every expansion, every crisis. When James Hale died, Cole had stood at the funeral and told Victoria she had her father's strength. He'd been her father's right hand. She'd assumed he'd be hers. Why would Cole sabotage the building? Garrett's voice went carefully neutral. I've been tracking some anomalous outbound data transfers over the past 3 months. Encrypted communications with Stratford Group. Victoria's breath caught. Stratford was Meridian Capital's primary competitor. If Meridian's deal fell through, Stratford would move in with a hostile takeover bid within 48 hours. Cole's been negotiating with them. Looks that way. If I had to guess, he's got a consulting contract and stock options waiting for him on the other side. The pieces clicked into place with brutal clarity. Cole knew the Meridian deal would close today. He knew that once it did, Victoria would restructure operations. He knew his position would be evaluated alongside everyone else's. And he knew that after 16 years of running the company his way, he wasn't going to accept being managed by James Hale's daughter. So he decided to burn it all down and walk away rich. Where is he now? His key card was used to enter the executive floor at 7:58 this morning. It hasn't been used to exit. He's still in the building. Victoria ended the call and sat in the silence of the truck cab, her mind working through scenarios. Cole was waiting for confirmation that the sabotage had worked, waiting to hear that the Meridian deal had collapsed, waiting to make his call to Stratford and seal his golden parachute. But Marcus Reed was in sub 2 right now working the problem. And if there was one thing Victoria had learned in the 4 years Marcus had worked for Hale Dynamics, it was that he didn't leave problems unsolved. Are you scared? Emma's voice pulled Victoria back to the present. The little girl was watching her with those steady gray eyes, reading her face like a map. Victoria considered lying, considered the kind of professional deflection that had become second nature. Then she looked at this 8-year-old who'd just lost her father's job because of Victoria's pride, and something in her shifted. Yes. Emma nodded slowly. My dad gets scared too. But he says being scared just means you care about what happens next. People who don't care are never scared. Victoria felt her eyes sting. She blinked hard, forcing the sensation back. Your dad is very wise. I know. The simple certainty in Emma's voice made something crack in Victoria's chest. This little girl had absolute faith in her father. Unshakable trust that he would handle whatever came, that he would keep her safe, that he was exactly who he appeared to be. Victoria had never had that. James Hale had been brilliant, driven, ruthless in pursuit of excellence. But he'd never been safe. He'd never been someone Victoria could trust to catch her if she fell. He'd taught her to climb, and then he'd made it clear that the only acceptable direction was up. Her phone buzzed. Garrett again. He did it. Marcus cut the relay leads in sequence. Building power is back. Elevators are moving. The people in shaft 3 are out. Victoria closed her eyes and let herself feel relief for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them and got back to work. What about the heating system? Coming back online now. It'll take 20 minutes to reach full capacity, but we're operational. And the financial servers. Silence. Garrett. That's the other problem. Building power is back, but someone pushed an authentication lockout to the financial server cluster at 8:02 this morning, before the power went out. All the systems we need for the Meridian signing are locked down. Victoria's relief evaporated. Can you override it? Not remotely. The lockout requires 2-person authorization, my biometric scan, and a 12-digit code that only you have. Where are you? Server room floor 12. I'll call you back. She ended the call and stared at the dashboard. The heating vents were blowing warm air, but she felt cold all the way through. Cole had been thorough. The power outage was just the opening move. The real attack was on the financial systems, the databases and platforms that held every contract, every client file, every piece of proprietary information that made Hale Dynamics worth $2 billion. If those systems stayed locked, the Meridian team would walk away, and Cole would get exactly what he wanted. Her phone rang. Marcus. This is Marcus Reed. I'm in the server room on 12 with Garrett Holloway. We need your authorization code to restore financial system access. We have 110 minutes. His voice was calm, professional, completely devoid of the anger or resentment he had every right to feel. He was just stating facts, working the problem, doing what needed to be done. Victoria felt something shift inside her. This was who Marcus Reed was. Not someone who held grudges or played political games, just an engineer who saw broken things and fixed them because that was the job. "Tell me the server room temperature. There's a thermometer on the east wall." A pause. She could hear him moving. 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That was the correct answer. The verification question her father had built into the security protocols designed to confirm that whoever was giving authorization codes was actually in the building and not being coerced remotely. "The code is 4719 Kilo 3 Alpha 82 Foxtrot 6. She heard him repeat it to Garrett. Then silence punctuated by the distant sound of keystrokes. "Systems are coming back online. Email, financial platforms, document management. Boardroom AV is live." Victoria let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "What about Cole's data transfer?" It was queued but incomplete. The lockout hit while it was still running. "Everything's still here. He almost got it out, but almost doesn't count." Victoria ended the call and sat back. Through the windshield she could see the Hale Dynamics tower. Lights were coming back on floor by floor, climbing toward the top like a pulse returning to a body that had gone into cardiac arrest. "Your dad fixed it." Emma looked up from her tablet and smiled. It was the first smile Victoria had seen from her, and it transformed her face completely. "He always does." The simple faith in those 3 words made Victoria's throat tight. Emma believed in her father with the kind of absolute certainty that Victoria had never felt about anyone. Not her own father, not herself. Definitely not the people she'd surrounded herself with in the 3 years since James Hale's death. But Marcus Reed had earned that faith. He'd proven it over and over in ways large and small. When the heating system failed during a January cold snap, he'd worked 72 hours straight to get it back online. When a pressure valve malfunction threatened to flood 3 floors, he'd diagnosed and fixed it before most people even knew there was a problem. When Victoria had questioned his methods, he'd documented his reasoning with the kind of meticulous precision that left no room for argument. And when she'd fired him unjustly, he'd walked away without a fight because making a scene in front of his daughter wasn't the kind of man he was. Then when she'd come begging for help, he'd set aside his pride and his anger and done the work because 23 people were in danger, and that mattered more than his wounded ego. Victoria had spent 3 years trying to prove she was worthy of her father's legacy by being exactly like him, hard, uncompromising, allergic to vulnerability. But sitting in this truck with Marcus Reed's 8-year-old daughter, watching the building come back to life because of a man she'd wronged, she was beginning to suspect that maybe her father's way wasn't the only way. Maybe it wasn't even the right way. Her phone buzzed. "Sandra. Meridian's team just landed. They're asking for confirmation that we're operational. Tell them yes, we're ready." "Victoria, what happened out there?" Victoria looked at Emma, who'd gone back to her tablet but was clearly listening to every word. "I learned something." She ended the call before Sandra could ask what that meant. Outside, the wind had started to ease. The blizzard was passing, leaving behind a city buried in white, and a building that had come within minutes of complete failure. Inside the truck, Emma shifted in her seat. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Yes." "Do you have kids?" The question was simple, but it hit like a gut punch. "No." "Why not?" Victoria considered several diplomatic answers. Then she decided that this child, who'd already seen more than she should have to see, deserved honesty. "I never made time for it. I was too focused on work." Emma absorbed this with the seriousness of someone weighing evidence. "That's sad." Victoria felt her eyes sting again. She blinked hard. "Yes, it is." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Emma spoke again, her voice quiet but certain. "My dad says you can't go back and fix the past. But you can fix today. And if you fix enough todays, eventually, you have a different past." The wisdom of it stunned Victoria. She'd spent 3 years trapped in her father's shadow, trying to prove herself worthy of a legacy she'd never asked for. Trying to be someone she wasn't because she thought that was the only way to earn respect. But maybe respect wasn't something you demanded through rigid adherence to rules. Maybe it was something you earned by making the right choices when it mattered, like admitting when you were wrong, like asking for help when you needed it, like recognizing that strength sometimes meant bending instead of breaking. Her phone rang. Marcus again. "We need to talk about Richard Cole." Victoria's pulse spiked. "What about him?" "He's still in the building, floor 19, and Garrett found something in the server logs you need to know about." Victoria listened as Marcus explained what they'd discovered. The encrypted communications with Stratford, the consulting contract, the timeline that made it clear Cole had been planning this for months. "He's waiting for confirmation that the sabotage worked. Garrett thinks he has someone on the outside trying to break into the financial servers right now." Victoria's mind raced through the implications. If Cole had an external partner restoring the servers, wouldn't be enough. They'd have to defend against active intrusion while simultaneously preparing for the Meridian signing. "Can you stop it?" "Pete Calloway is defending the servers, but he's going to need backup. I worked network security for 2 years in the Corps before I moved to mechanical systems. I can help." Victoria felt something settle in her chest. Marcus wasn't just fixing the immediate crisis. He was thinking 3 moves ahead, anticipating problems before they materialized, positioning resources to handle threats that hadn't fully developed yet. That was the kind of judgment that couldn't be taught. It came from experience, from a fundamental understanding of how systems worked and how they failed. It was exactly the kind of expertise Victoria had thrown away this morning because she'd been too proud to admit that someone else might know better than she did. "Do it. I'm on my way in." She ended the call and looked at Emma. "I need to go inside now. Miss Sandra is going to come out and stay with you." Emma nodded. "Are you going to help my dad?" Victoria paused her hand on the door handle. "Yes, I'm going to help him." Emma's expression shifted into something that might have been approval. "Good. He's really good at his job, but he gets lonely doing it by himself." The observation hit Victoria like a slap. She'd spent 3 years cultivating an image of solitary competence, convincing herself that isolation was the price of leadership. But Emma saw through it in seconds, saw that the loneliness Victoria wore like armor was actually just fear dressed up as strength. Victoria pushed open the door and stepped back into the cold. The wind had died down to something almost manageable, and the snow was falling in soft, fat flakes instead of the horizontal barrage from earlier. She made her way back to the building entrance, her mind already shifting into operational mode. Marcus Reed was in the server room defending against a cyber attack while simultaneously preparing to confront the man who'd tried to destroy the company. Richard Cole was somewhere on the 19th floor waiting for confirmation that his sabotage had succeeded. The Meridian Capital team would be at the building in 70 minutes, expecting to sign a $2.1 billion acquisition agreement. And Victoria Hale, who'd started this morning by firing the best engineer she'd ever worked with, was about to walk into the most consequential day of her professional life with absolutely no margin for error. She passed through the lobby. Emergency lighting cast everything in amber tones, and the temperature was still climbing towards something approaching comfortable. Sandra met her at the elevator bank with a tablet and a determined expression. "Meridian confirmed. They'll be here at 11:45. Cole is in conference room C on 19. Building security has eyes on him, but he hasn't moved in 20 minutes. Victoria nodded. "Send someone out to stay with Emma in Marcus's truck. Then get legal and the Meridian contract team to boardroom A. We're proceeding as scheduled." Sandra's eyebrows rose slightly. "You think we can actually pull this off?" Victoria thought about Marcus Reed somewhere 12 floors above her writing code to defend against an attack he hadn't anticipated and probably shouldn't have to handle. She thought about Emma sitting in a truck because her father was too principled to compromise on his daughter's safety even when his own job hung in the balance. She thought about Richard Cole waiting in a conference room for confirmation of a betrayal that was falling apart in real time. "Yes, we're going to pull this off." She stepped into the elevator and hit the button for 12. As the doors closed, She caught her reflection in the polished metal hair slightly disheveled from the wind, blazer-wrinkled eyes harder than they'd been this morning but somehow more focused. She looked like someone who'd been tested and was still standing. The elevator climbed. Victoria closed her eyes and let herself feel the weight of everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. The firing, the crisis, the humiliation of having to beg for help, the slow, painful realization that she'd been wrong about almost everything that mattered. When the doors opened on 12, Marcus was waiting in the hallway. His hands were covered in grease from the relay work in Sub 2, and there was a streak of something dark across his forehead. He looked tired and alert in equal measure. Their eyes met. Victoria had prepared several things to say. Apologies, explanations, justifications for decisions that couldn't be justified. Instead, she just said, "What do you need?" Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Not forgiveness, it was too soon for that, but maybe recognition, an acknowledgement that Victoria was finally asking the right question. Cole's external partner is attempting a distributed attack on the financial servers. Victoria nodded. You have it, Garrett. Victoria nodded. You have it. Garrett will give you full credentials. What else? The heating system is back online, but one of the primary pumps took damage during the shutdown. We're running at 60% capacity. Boardroom A is at 58 degrees and climbing, but it won't hit comfortable range by noon. Victoria did the math. The Meridian team would notice. They'd wonder. Questions would lead to explanations, and explanations would expose the sabotage. Once that happened, they'd walk. Can you fix it? Marcus met her eyes. I can bypass the damaged pump and reroute through the secondary line. It'll take 20 minutes if nothing goes wrong. Do it. I'll handle Meridian. Marcus nodded once and turned toward the server room. Victoria watched him go. This man she'd wronged, and who was now working to save everything she'd built, and felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of what leadership actually meant. It wasn't about being the smartest person in the room. It wasn't about never showing weakness or doubt. It wasn't about rigid adherence to rules that prioritized protocol over people. It was about recognizing when you were wrong, about trusting the people who'd earned that trust, about making decisions that served something larger than your own ego. Her father had never taught her that. James Hale had led through force of will and the absolute certainty that his way was the only way. It had worked for him, maybe. But it had also left him alone at the end, dying in a hospital room with a daughter who loved him but had never really known him. Victoria didn't want that. She didn't want to spend the rest of her life proving herself to the ghost of a man who'd never told her she was enough. She wanted to build something real, something that lasted not because people feared her, but because they believed in what they were building together. It was a radical thought. It made her feel exposed and uncertain and more vulnerable than she'd allowed herself to feel in years. It also felt like the truth. She pulled out her phone and called Garrett. I need you to pull together everything you have on Cole's communications with Stratford. Timestamps, content, financial details. I want a complete picture of what he was planning and how close he came to pulling it off. Planning to press charges? Eventually. Right now, I just need leverage. She ended the call and headed toward the stairs. The elevator was working, but she needed the time to think, and climbing 19 floors would give her that. By the time she reached the executive level, her legs were burning and her breath was coming hard. The floor was quiet emergency lighting, casting long shadows across empty offices. Conference room C was at the north end, a small space with glass walls that overlooked the city. Richard Cole sat inside his phone on the table in front of him, a go-bag by the door. He looked up as Victoria approached, and his expression cycled through surprise, calculation, and resignation in the space of 3 seconds. She pushed open the door and walked in. Richard? Victoria. They stood facing each other across the conference table, two people who'd worked together for 3 years without ever really understanding each other. You used your keycard to access Sub 2 at 11:47 last night. You installed a relay device on the auxiliary power node. You pushed an authentication lockout to the financial servers at 8:02 this morning. and you've been in contact with Stratford Group for 3 months negotiating a consulting contract contingent on Meridian's deal failing." Cole's face went carefully blank. "Those are serious accusations." "They're facts. Garrett has the logs, Marcus has the relay device, and Pete Calloway just traced your external partner's intrusion attempt back to an IP address registered to Thomas Reeves." The name hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Thomas Reeves, board member, her father's oldest friend, the man who'd mentored Victoria through the first 2 years after James Hale's death. Cole's silence confirmed what Victoria had just started to suspect. This wasn't just about him. It was bigger, deeper, a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the company her father had built. Victoria felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, not even anger, just the crystalline clarity that came from understanding exactly what she was up against. "You're both done." Cole stood slowly. "Your father would be ashamed of what you've become." The words were designed to hurt, and they did. But Victoria had spent the last 2 hours watching Marcus Reed put aside his own pain to help people who didn't deserve his help, and she'd learned something about the difference between strength and cruelty. "My father built this company. I'm going to make sure it survives. That's all he ever asked of me." She turned and walked out, leaving Cole with his phone and his go bag and the slow realization that his carefully constructed plan had fallen apart completely. In the hallway, she allowed herself exactly 10 seconds to feel the weight of Thomas Reeves's betrayal. He'd been at her father's funeral. He'd told her she was ready. He'd advised her through every major decision for 3 years. And the entire time he'd been undermining her, working with Cole to position himself for a takeover that would restore the old guard and erase everything Victoria had tried to build. The 10 seconds ended. Victoria straightened her shoulders and headed for the elevator. She had a deal to close. The server room on the 12th floor hummed with the white noise of machines that never stopped thinking. Marcus sat at a terminal, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from 2 years running network security in places where mistakes meant people died. Pete Calloway occupied the adjacent workstation, his younger face tight with concentration as lines of code scrolled past faster than most people could read. On the main display, a map of incoming connections lit up like a constellation. Most were legitimate automated processes, scheduled backups, routine authentication checks, but 3 stood out, their patterns irregular, their origins masked behind layers of proxy servers. "He's probing the perimeter defenses." Pete's voice carried the tension of someone who understood exactly what failure would cost. Marcus leaned forward, watching the attack vectors shift and adapt in real time. "Thomas Reeves isn't just good, he's military-grade good." The realization settled over them like cold water. This wasn't some hired hacker working for cash. Thomas had resources, training, and the kind of institutional knowledge that came from decades inside the system he was now trying to dismantle. Marcus pulled up a secondary terminal and started writing code. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory from years of building defensive protocols in environments where the enemy was always one step ahead. The trick wasn't to block every attack that was impossible. The trick was to make the attacker waste resources on targets that didn't matter while you fortified what did. "I'm creating a honeypot. We'll route his intrusion attempts to a dummy server cluster that looks legitimate but contains nothing he needs." Pete's eyes widened. "He'll think he's breaking through, right up until he realizes he's been hitting a decoy. By then, we'll have locked down the real targets and traced his access points." The code took shape on the screen, layers of misdirection wrapped around false data structures designed to waste an attacker's time and processing power. Marcus had built systems like this in Baghdad, protecting field communications from insurgents who'd learned network warfare from the same manuals the U.S. military used. The fundamentals didn't change, only the stakes. His phone buzzed. Garrett. Cole's still in conference room C. Victoria just left him there. She looked like she wanted to set something on fire. Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. Did she get what she needed? "Everything. I'm sending Chicago PD to pick up Thomas Reeves right now. His house in Winnetka registered IP, the whole package." Marcus ended the call and went back to his code. The honeypot was almost ready. Another 10 minutes and Thomas Reeves would be attacking shadows while the real financial systems locked down behind encryption that would take quantum computing to crack. Pete's screen flashed red. He just broke through the first firewall layer. Marcus didn't react. His fingers kept moving. Let him. That's what we want. He's inside the perimeter. He's inside the perimeter we showed him. The real perimeter is 3 layers deeper. The attack intensified. Connection requests flooded in from multiple IP addresses simultaneously, a distributed assault designed to overwhelm defensive systems through sheer volume. Marcus watched the patterns, reading the strategy behind the execution. Thomas was trying to force them into reactive defense, making them spread their resources thin across too many threats. Instead, Marcus activated the honeypot. On the main display, the flood of incoming connections suddenly redirected. Instead of hitting the actual financial servers, they slammed into the decoy cluster Marcus had built. The dummy system accepted the connections, served up fake authentication portals, and logged every single access attempt with forensic precision. Thomas Reeves was now breaking into a server that existed only to collect evidence against him. Pete let out a breath that might have been a laugh. That's beautiful. That's survival. In the field, you don't win by being stronger. You win by making the enemy think they're winning right up until they've already lost. Marcus pulled up the trace logs. The decoy was collecting IP addresses, timestamp data, even keystroke patterns that could be used for identification. Within 15 minutes, they'd have enough evidence to prosecute Thomas Reeves for computer fraud, corporate espionage, and half a dozen other felonies that carried prison time measured in decades. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Victoria. How long until the servers are secure? 10 minutes, maybe less. Thomas is attacking a honeypot right now. He thinks he's breaking in. He's actually just giving us everything we need to put him away. A pause on the other end. When Victoria spoke again, her voice carried something Marcus hadn't heard before, something that might have been respect. You learned this in the Army. Corps of Engineers, Network Security Detachment, Baghdad, 2015 to 2017. We protected communications infrastructure from people who'd blow themselves up for a chance to take out our systems. This is easier. Another pause. When this is over, we need to talk about your role here. The job you've been doing is about 20% of what you're actually capable of. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not gratitude that would come later, maybe. Right now, it was just the recognition that Victoria Hale was finally seeing him clearly, instead of through the lens of protocols and org charts and the rigid certainty that had almost destroyed her company. Right now, I just need to make sure Thomas doesn't realize he's hitting a decoy before we lock everything down. Do it. She ended the call. Marcus went back to his terminal and watched the attack intensify. Thomas was getting frustrated. The honeypot was designed to resist just enough to seem real, but not enough to trigger suspicion. Every failed authentication attempt made him push harder, commit more resources, expose more of his methodology. Pete pulled up a secondary display showing the real financial servers. They sat behind 3 layers of encryption, completely invisible to the attack that was raging against their decoy counterparts. Client contracts, proprietary algorithms, trade secrets worth billions, all of it safe because Thomas Reeves was too busy fighting shadows to notice the real fortress. He's trying SQL injection now. Marcus shook his head. That's desperation. He knows he's running out of time. How much longer do we let this run? Marcus checked the clock. 11:15. The Meridian team would be at the building in 30 minutes. Victoria needed those financial systems fully operational and verified secure before they walked into the boardroom. 5 more minutes. Then we kill his access completely and lock down everything he touched. I want him to know he failed. The minutes crawled past. On the main display, Thomas's attack grew more erratic, less strategic. He was throwing everything at the honeypot now, burning through his arsenal of exploits with the kind of reckless aggression that came from realizing a plan was falling apart. At 11:20, Marcus terminated the honeypot's external connections. Every port Thomas Reeves had been using went dark simultaneously. On his end, it would look like a catastrophic system crash, servers going offline, connections dropping, all his progress evaporating in an instant. The reality was simpler. Marcus had just slammed every door and locked Thomas outside in the cold. Pete ran a security scan on the real financial systems. Every metric came back green. "We're clean. No intrusion, no corruption, no unauthorized access. Everything's exactly as it should be." Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Then he stood and headed for the door. Garrett was waiting in the hallway with 2 Chicago PD detectives and a set of printed access logs that documented every crime Thomas Reeves and Richard Cole had committed in the last 12 hours. The older detective, a woman named Chen with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much, flipped through the logs with the methodical attention of someone building a case. "This is solid. We've got timestamps, physical evidence from the relay device, digital forensics showing the attack on your servers. Both men are looking at federal charges." Marcus nodded. "Thomas Reeves is at his house in Winnetka. Richard Cole is on the 19th floor, conference room C." Chen gestured to her partner, a younger man named Rodriguez. "Winnetka PD is picking up Reeves. We'll handle Cole." They moved toward the elevator. Marcus stayed behind, his mind already shifting to the next problem. The heating system was still running at reduced capacity. Boardroom A needed to be at least 68 degrees for the signing, and right now it was sitting at 62 and climbing too slowly. He took the stairs down to 4, where the HVAC master controls lived behind a locked panel that most people didn't know existed. The air in the mechanical room tasted like oil and metal. The primary pump system showed damage on the diagnostic display, a cracked housing seal that was bleeding pressure and dropping efficiency across the entire heating grid. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Garrett. "I need a replacement seal for pump assembly 7B. Check the parts inventory on sub 3. "Looking, we don't have one in stock." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The seal was a custom component machined specifically for the Hale Dynamics installation. Ordering one would take weeks. They had 40 minutes. "Then I'm bypassing the damaged pump and rerouting through the secondary line. It'll stress the backup system, but it'll hold long enough for the signing." He didn't wait for confirmation. His hands were already moving, shutting down the damaged pump and redirecting flow through channels designed for redundancy rather than primary operation. The system resisted pressure differentials, shifted valves, clicked in protest. Warning lights flashed on the diagnostic panel. Marcus ignored them. He'd rebuilt this system from the ground up 4 years ago, back when James Hale was still alive, and Victoria was just the CEO's daughter learning the business from the executive suite. He knew every pipe, every valve, every point where the infrastructure could flex and where it would break. The bypass took 18 minutes. When he finished, the diagnostic display showed green across the board. Not optimal, not designed for long-term operation, but functional, stable, good enough. He pulled out his phone to check the boardroom temperature, 66 degrees and rising. By noon it would hit the target. His phone buzzed. A text from Sandra. "Meridian team just arrived. They're asking questions about the emergency lighting. Victoria needs you in the lobby." Marcus headed for the stairs again. His legs were starting to feel the accumulated strain of the morning, the sprint down to sub 2, the 12-floor climb, the constant movement between crisis points. But stopping wasn't an option. Not yet. The lobby had transformed since he'd last seen it. The emergency lighting was gone, replaced by the normal overhead floods that turned marble floors into mirrors. The temperature felt almost comfortable. People moved with purpose rather than panic. The building looked like it had never been in danger of collapse. Victoria stood near the elevator bank with 3 people Marcus didn't recognize. 2 men and a woman, all of them carrying the kind of leather portfolios that cost more than Marcus made in a month. The Meridian Capital legal team. The woman, Caroline Brandt, if Marcus remembered the briefing materials correctly, was asking a question about the emergency lighting in some sections of the upper floors. Victoria's response was smooth, professional, giving away nothing about the chaos that had consumed the building less than 2 hours ago. Their eyes met across the lobby. Victoria's expression shifted fractionally, a micro-change that acknowledged his presence without interrupting her conversation. Marcus moved to the edge of the space and waited. The Meridian team seemed satisfied with whatever Victoria had told them. They moved toward the elevators, Caroline Brandt in the lead, her colleagues flanking her like an honor guard. The doors closed. Victoria crossed to where Marcus stood. Thomas Reeves is in custody. Chicago PD picked him up 20 minutes ago. They found encrypted communications on his personal computer that detail the entire conspiracy. Marcus nodded. Cole, also in custody. Garrett gave the police everything they needed. Both men are being processed downtown right now. Something passed between them in the silence that followed. Not forgiveness that would take time and maybe more than time, but acknowledgement. An understanding that they'd both made choices this morning, and some of those choices had been wrong, and what mattered now was moving forward instead of staying trapped in what had already happened. Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression tightened. Patricia Moss wants an emergency board meeting. She heard about the power outage. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Patricia Moss was the board member who'd been pushing to replace Victoria since the day James Hale died. If she got the votes, Victoria would be out by the end of the week. When, 2 o'clock, right after the Meridian signing, Victoria's voice stayed level, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders the way her hand gripped the phone a fraction too tight. This was the end game Patricia had been building toward. The power outage gave her the ammunition she needed. It didn't matter that the sabotage had been orchestrated by two men Victoria trusted. It didn't matter that she'd managed to close the deal anyway. Patricia would frame it as a failure of leadership, proof that James Hale's daughter wasn't capable of protecting the company she'd inherited. "You saved the company this morning." Victoria's laugh was short and bitter. "I saved it from a crisis I didn't see coming because I was too busy enforcing protocol instead of paying attention to the people around me." "Patricia's not wrong. I failed." Marcus watched her face, seeing the weight of 3 years pressing down on someone who'd never been given permission to admit weakness. James Hale had raised his daughter to be steel-rigid, unbending, allergic to doubt. It had made her a formidable CEO. It had also made her brittle. Sometimes the only way to learn what you're capable of is to fail first. The question isn't whether you failed. The question is what you do next. Victoria looked at him, really looked, and something in her expression cracked just slightly. "I don't know if I have a next. Patricia has the votes. The board's been waiting for an excuse to replace me. This is it." "Then change the narrative. Don't let her control the story. You know what actually happened this morning. Make sure they do too." Victoria's phone buzzed again. "Sandra. Boardroom A is ready. 68 degrees full/V operational legal team standing by. We're good to go." Victoria straightened her shoulders, and Marcus watched the transformation happen in real time. The vulnerability disappeared behind the professional armor she'd spent years perfecting. The doubt got locked away somewhere it wouldn't interfere with what had to happen next. "I need to prepare for the signing. Will you be available if anything breaks?" "I'll be monitoring systems from the 4th floor. If anything shifts, you'll know immediately." She nodded once and turned toward the elevators. Marcus watched her go, this woman who'd fired him unjustly and then asked for his help, and was now walking into the most important meeting of her career with the knowledge that even if she succeeded, it might not be enough. He took the stairs back to 4. The HVAC control room was empty, just him and the diagnostic displays and the low hum of machinery that kept 60 floors of steel and glass habitable in the middle of a Chicago winter. He pulled up the boardroom temperature readings. 68.3 degrees. Stable. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma routed through Sandra's number. "Is everything fixed?" Marcus smiled despite everything and typed back, "Getting there, bug. How are you doing?" "Miss Sandra got me hot chocolate. She's nice. The mean lady isn't as mean as I thought." Marcus stared at that last sentence for a long moment. Emma had spent less than an hour with Victoria Hale and somehow managed to see past the armor to whatever was underneath. 8 years old, and already better at reading people than Marcus would ever be. He pocketed his phone and pulled up the building-wide diagnostics. Every system showed green. Power distribution, normal. HVAC, operating within acceptable parameters despite the bypass. Elevators running smooth. Emergency lighting systems reset and ready. The tower was alive and stable, breathing the way it was supposed to breathe. Somewhere 14 floors above him, Victoria Hale was signing documents that would reshape the company her father built. Somewhere in a police station downtown, Richard Cole and Thomas Reeves were realizing that decades of careful positioning had evaporated in a single morning. And somewhere in Marcus's truck in the parking structure, Emma was drinking hot chocolate with a woman she'd called mean just a few hours ago. The world was full of small transformations if you paid attention. Marcus's phone rang. Garrett. We've got a problem. The words hit like ice water. Marcus was already moving before Garrett finished the sentence. What kind of problem? The Meridian signing just hit a snag. Caroline Brandt is asking questions about the power outage. She wants a full explanation before they proceed. Marcus felt his chest tighten. They were so close. 2 hours of crisis management, and now it might fall apart because someone asked the right question at the wrong time. Where's Victoria? Boardroom A. She's explaining what happened, but Caroline looks skeptical. If Meridian walks, we're done. Marcus ended the call and headed for the stairs. 14 floors. He took them 2 at a time, his legs burning by the 3rd landing, his lungs working hard by the 6th. He didn't slow down. When he hit the 14th floor, he was breathing hard, and his shirt was damp with sweat. The hallway outside Boardroom A was empty except for Sandra, who stood near the door with her tablet and an expression that said she was calculating worst-case scenarios. How bad? Sandra's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Caroline wants to know why we didn't disclose the power outage before they flew out. She's asking if there are other infrastructure issues we've been hiding. Victoria's trying to manage it, but Caroline's a lawyer. She smells blood. Through the glass wall, Marcus could see Victoria standing at the head of the conference table. Her posture was perfect, her expression calm. But he'd spent 4 years learning to read her micro-expressions, and right now she was holding on by her fingernails. Caroline Brandt sat across from her arms, crossed face skeptical. The 2 men flanking her looked equally unconvinced. At the far end of the table, the Hale Dynamics legal team sat frozen, waiting to see which way this would break. Marcus made a decision that would probably get him fired again. He pushed open the door and walked in. Everyone turned. Victoria's eyes widened fractionally, surprise, then something that might have been relief, then professional composure snapping back into place. "Excuse me." Caroline Brandt's gaze shifted to Marcus, taking in his work clothes and the grease still visible under his fingernails despite the quick wash he'd managed earlier. "Who are you?" "Marcus Reed, Director of Building Systems. I'm the person who restored power this morning." Caroline's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened with interest. "And why did the power go out?" Marcus could have deflected, could have given her the sanitized version that protected the company's reputation and avoided difficult questions. Instead, he told her the truth. 2 executives, our COO and a board member, conspired to sabotage the building's power systems in order to force the collapse of your acquisition deal. They installed a relay device on our backup power infrastructure and triggered a manual shutdown at 8:03 this morning. They're both in police custody right now, facing federal charges. The silence that followed was absolute. Caroline Brandt's expression cycled through shock calculation and something that looked like grudging respect. "You're telling me someone tried to tank this deal by cutting power to the building?" "Yes." "And you fixed it?" "We fixed it. Me, our IT security team, and Miss Hale. The systems are fully operational now. The sabotage failed." Caroline leaned back in her chair, her eyes moving between Marcus and Victoria. Most companies would have tried to hide something like that, bury it under NDAs and corporate PR. Victoria spoke, her voice steady. Most companies don't have $2.1 billion on the line and a director of building systems who refuses to let problems stay broken. Something shifted in Caroline's expression. She glanced at her colleagues, then back at Victoria. "All right. I appreciate the honesty. Let's proceed." The tension in the room evaporated like steam. Marcus backed toward the door, but Victoria's voice stopped him. "Stay. You should be here for this." He hesitated. This was her moment. Her deal. Her vindication. "I'm not. You're the reason this company is still standing. You should see what that accomplishment looks like." Marcus moved to the side of the room and stood against the wall. On the table, documents waited in neat stacks. The Meridian legal team produced pens. Victoria picked hers up, and Marcus saw her hand shake just slightly before she steadied it. She signed her name in 3 places. Caroline Brandt signed opposite. The 2 men added their signatures below. It took less than 5 minutes. $2.1 billion. 3 years of negotiation. The largest acquisition in Hale Dynamics' history. Done. Caroline stood and extended her hand. Victoria shook it, and for just a moment Marcus saw exhaustion break through the professional mask. Then it was gone, replaced by the composed CEO who'd just closed the deal of her career. The Meridian team gathered their portfolios and headed for the door. Caroline paused beside Marcus on her way out. "Good work this morning. Not many people could pull that off." "It wasn't just me." "No. But you're the one who showed up anyway. That counts." She left. The door closed behind her. The room was suddenly very quiet. Victoria sat down, and the motion looked like gravity winning after hours of resistance. She put her hands flat on the table and just breathed. Sandra appeared in the doorway. "Patricia Moss is on her way up. She wants to convene the emergency board meeting now instead of at 2. Victoria's eyes closed. "Of course she does." Marcus felt something cold settle in his gut. Patricia wasn't going to give Victoria time to recover. She was going to strike while the chaos was fresh before Victoria could regroup and build her defense. "How many votes does she have?" Sandra's expression was grim. 5 out of 9. She needs 6 for majority. David Chen is undecided. If she gets him, Victoria's out. Victoria stood her composure, reassembling piece by piece. "All right, let's do this." She looked at Marcus, and something passed between them. Gratitude, maybe, or just the shared understanding of people who'd been through fire together and come out the other side still breathing. "Thank you for everything." "You're welcome." Victoria walked past him toward the door. Sandra fell in beside her, already pulling up files on her tablet. The legal team followed. Within 30 seconds, the boardroom was empty except for Marcus and the signed contracts that represented everything Victoria had been fighting to protect. He should leave. Go back to the HVAC control room. Monitor systems. Do the job he was actually paid to do. Instead, he followed them to the 19th floor. The executive conference room was twice the size of Boardroom A, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Lake Michigan. The water was gray and restless under the storm clouds, whitecaps visible even from this height. Patricia Moss sat at the head of the table, a woman in her mid-60s with silver hair and the kind of presence that came from 4 decades in corporate governance. David Chen sat to her left, younger and less certain, his expression carefully neutral. The other board members filled in around them, some Victoria's allies, some Patricia's, most just waiting to see which way the wind blew. Victoria took her seat at the opposite end of the table. Marcus stayed by the door, invisible but present. Patricia's eyes flicked to him and dismissed him in the same motion. He was just staff, not worth her attention. "Thank you all for coming on short notice." Patricia's voice was smooth, measured, the tone of someone who'd already won and was just going through the formalities. "We're here to discuss this morning's events, specifically the catastrophic power failure that nearly destroyed our acquisition deal with Meridian Capital." Victoria didn't flinch. The power failure was the result of criminal sabotage by Richard Cole and Thomas Reeves. Both men are in police custody. The systems have been fully restored. The Meridian deal closed 20 minutes ago. Patricia smiled, and it wasn't warm. "Yes, after you fired and then rehired your director of building systems in the middle of a crisis. After you left the building during a critical negotiation to personally beg him to come back. After you allowed a child into the workspace on the morning of the most important deal in company history. Each point landed like a hammer blow. Marcus felt his hands curl into fists. I made the best decisions I could with the information I had. Victoria's voice stayed level, but Marcus could see the strain in her shoulders. Your decisions nearly cost us everything. Patricia leaned forward. James Hale built this company through discipline and judgment. He would never have allowed personal feelings to interfere with protocol. He would never have put us in this position. The invocation of James Hale hit Victoria like a physical blow. Marcus saw it in the way her spine stiffened, the way her jaw tightened. Patricia knew exactly where to strike. My father isn't here. Victoria's voice was quiet but steady. I am. And I did what I had to do to save this company from people who were trying to destroy it from the inside. If you think that's a failure of leadership, then you don't understand what leadership actually requires. Patricia's smile widened. I understand that a leader who can't maintain control of her own executive team is a leader who shouldn't be in charge. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the table, board members shifted, calculating, weighing their options. Patricia had her 5 votes locked. David Chen sat silent, his face unreadable. Marcus stepped forward without thinking. You're making a mistake. Every eye in the room turned to him. Patricia's expression went from dismissive to annoyed. This is a closed session. You need to leave. I'm not leaving. Not until you hear what actually happened this morning. Victoria's voice was sharp. Marcus, no. He looked at her and something passed between them. Permission maybe, or just understanding. You want to talk about James Hale, fine. I worked for him for 6 months before he died. He was brilliant, demanding, completely certain that his way was the only way. And you know what? It worked for him. But it wouldn't have worked this morning. He turned to Patricia. This morning, Victoria Hale had to choose between her pride and her company. She had to admit she was wrong, ask for help, and trust someone she'd just fired to do what needed to be done. That took more courage than any amount of rigid protocol ever could. And because she made that choice, 23 people got out of a dead elevator, 2 criminals are in custody, and Meridian Capital just signed the biggest deal in company history. The room was silent. Patricia's face had gone cold. You're out of line. Maybe. But I'm also right. You want to replace Victoria because she doesn't lead the way James did. That's exactly why you shouldn't. James Hale's way almost destroyed this company this morning. Victoria's way saved it. David Chen spoke for the first time, his voice thoughtful. What do you mean James Hale's way almost destroyed the company? Marcus took a breath. Richard Cole and Thomas Reeves were both James Hale's closest advisors. They had access, authority, and complete trust because they'd been with him from the beginning. Nobody questioned them. Nobody challenged them. That's how they were able to plan and execute sabotage that came within minutes of succeeding. James Hale's leadership style created blind spots. Victoria's exposing them. Patricia stood. This is inappropriate. We're voting. Now. But David Chen was leaning forward, his expression shifting from neutral to engaged. Actually, I'd like to hear more. Victoria, walk us through your decision-making process this morning. Everything. Don't leave anything out. Victoria glanced at Marcus, then back at the board. When she spoke, her voice was steady. At 7:50 this morning, I terminated Marcus Reed's employment for violating safety protocols. I believed I was enforcing necessary standards. I was actually punishing someone for using judgment instead of blindly following rules. She paused. At 8:04, the building lost power. I learned that Marcus was the only person who could fix it. I had a choice. Let my pride prevent me from asking for help or do what the company needed. I chose the company. I went to the parking structure and asked Marcus to come back. Patricia's voice was ice. And he demanded concessions. He demanded that I watch his 8-year-old daughter while he fixed the problem I'd helped create. Yes, that's called having priorities. It's also called being a good father. Victoria's voice gained strength. While I sat in his truck learning that I'd been wrong about almost everything, Marcus went down to sub 2 and discovered the sabotage. He disabled it. He restored power. He defended our financial servers from a cyber attack. He bypassed a damaged heating system and got the building operational in time for the signing. He did all of that after I'd humiliated him in front of his daughter and taken away his livelihood. She looked directly at Patricia. You want to talk about leadership? Marcus Reed showed me what it looks like. It's not about being right all the time. It's about recognizing when you're wrong and fixing it. It's about trusting the people who've earned that trust, even when it costs you something to do it. David Chen nodded slowly. And the Meridian deal? Closed, signed, complete. $2.1 billion. Every term we negotiated. Caroline Brandt asked me directly about the power outage. I told her the truth. She appreciated the honesty and proceeded. Patricia's voice was sharp. You told our acquisition partner that we'd been sabotaged by our own executives. Yes, because hiding it would have been worse. Meridian deserved to know what they were buying. Now they do. And they bought it anyway. The room went quiet. Board members glanced at each other. Patricia's certainty began to show cracks. David Chen spoke again. I'd like to table the vote until we've had time to review all the evidence. Police reports, forensic data, the complete timeline. We shouldn't make a decision this significant based on incomplete information. Patricia's jaw tightened. The information is complete. Victoria Hale lost control. With respect, Patricia, she didn't lose control. She adapted. And maybe that's exactly what this company needs. David looked at Victoria. I'm not ready to vote you out. Not until I understand everything that happened and why. Motion to table. 5 hands went up immediately. Patricia's face went rigid, but she'd lost the room. Motion carries. We'll reconvene in 1 week. She stood and walked out without another word. The other board members followed more slowly, some nodding to Victoria as they passed others, keeping their expressions carefully neutral. When the room emptied, only Victoria, Marcus, and Sandra remained. Victoria sat down slowly as if her legs had stopped working all at once. That was close. Sandra's voice was quiet. You bought a week. Use it. She left, closing the door behind her. Marcus moved to the window and looked out at the lake. The storm was passing. Sunlight broke through the clouds in narrow beams that turned the water silver. I shouldn't have spoken up. Victoria's voice came from behind him. Why not? That wasn't my place. Board meetings, corporate governance, that's your world. I just fix buildings. You fix more than buildings. He turned. Victoria was still sitting at the conference table, her hands flat on the polished wood, her expression unguarded in a way he'd never seen before. I was wrong about you. About what mattered. About everything my father taught me. Marcus said nothing. Sometimes silence was the only appropriate response. He raised me to believe that showing weakness was fatal, that asking for help meant you'd already failed, that the only way to earn respect was to never let anyone see you uncertain. Her voice cracked slightly. But this morning, when I had to ask you to come back, when I had to sit in your truck with your daughter and admit I'd been wrong, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. And it was also the right thing, the only thing. Marcus crossed to the table and sat down across from her. Your father was wrong about a lot of things, but he was right about one: you're stronger than you think you are. You just needed to figure out that strength isn't the same as rigidity. Victoria looked at him and her eyes were wet. I don't know how to do this. Lead differently. Be different. Nobody does. You figure it out as you go. Make mistakes. Fix them. Ask for help when you need it. Trust the people who show up. Like you. Like me. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside Chicago, spread out below them 60 stories of vertical distance between this room and the ground. Marcus thought about Emma, probably still in the truck with Sandra, drinking hot chocolate and doing whatever 8-year-olds did when the adults around them were busy saving companies. He thought about the building humming beneath them, alive and warm, because they'd fought for it. He thought about second chances and what they cost, and whether they were ever really free. His phone buzzed. A text from Garrett. CPD just called. Cole and Reeves both lawyered up. They're not talking, but we have enough evidence without their cooperation. Federal prosecutors are interested. Marcus showed Victoria the text. She read it and nodded. Good. They should face consequences. So should you. Her eyes snapped up, startled. What? You fired me unjustly this morning, in front of my daughter. That has consequences too. Victoria's face went pale. I know. I'm sorry. I want 3 things. She stopped, waited. 1, Emma comes to work with me on snow days or emergencies, non-negotiable. Agreed. 2, my team's safety judgments stand unless you can show me technical reasoning why they're wrong, not policy. Technical reasoning. Agreed. 3, you apologize to Emma, not for firing me, for scaring her. Victoria's breath caught. Yes, of course. Marcus stood. Then we're good. I'll get back to work. He headed for the door. Victoria's voice stopped him. Marcus? He turned. Thank you. For showing up. For staying. For everything. You're welcome. He left her there alone in the conference room with her thoughts and her victories and the weight of everything that still had to be faced. The elevator carried him down 60 floors, and with each descent he felt the accumulated tension of the morning start to ease. Not gone, not forgotten, but manageable. The lobby was quiet. Afternoon light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning marble into gold. The building breathed normally, its systems running smooth, its heart beating steady. Marcus pushed through the doors into the cold and walked across the parking structure to his truck. Sandra had left 20 minutes ago, and Emma was alone in the back seat, her tablet forgotten, her eyes watching the building with the intensity of someone waiting for something important. He opened the door and climbed in. Hey, Bug. Hey, Dad, did you save everybody? We all saved each other. That's how it works. Emma considered this with her usual seriousness. Miss Victoria is coming to say sorry, isn't she? Marcus felt his eyebrows rise. How did you know that? Because you told her to. And she listens to you now. 8 years old and already understanding dynamics that took most adults decades to figure out. Marcus started the engine and let the heat build. Yeah, Bug, she's coming. But not today. Today we're going home. Emma nodded, satisfied. She picked up her tablet and went back to whatever game had been occupying her attention. Marcus put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking structure into the thin winter sunlight. Behind them, the Hale Dynamics Tower stood against the sky, every window lit, every system running, every floor warm and occupied and alive. Marcus had built those systems, maintained them, defended them, and this morning he'd saved them when they'd been pushed to the edge of catastrophic failure. Tomorrow he'd do it again, because that was the job. And for the first time in 3 years, he believed the person signing his paychecks actually understood what that job was worth. 3 days passed before Marcus made his decision. He spent them in the kind of careful evaluation that came from years of assessing structural integrity, looking for cracks, testing load-bearing capacity, determining whether something could hold weight or would collapse under pressure. Ellen Kraft sat across from him in her office on West Adams, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the kind of sharp attention that came from 2 decades parsing employment contracts for people who couldn't afford to get taken advantage of. She'd represented Marcus during his initial hiring at Hale Dynamics. Now she was reviewing Victoria's reinstatement offer with the same methodical precision she'd deploy on a minefield. The decision authority clause is vague. Full authority over engineering methodology sounds good until someone decides methodology doesn't include actual implementation decisions. We need to tighten this. Marcus watched her mark up the document with a red pen, her handwriting small and precise. What are you changing it to? Final decision authority over all technical judgments related to building systems, infrastructure, maintenance, and safety protocols. Executive override requires written technical justification subject to independent engineering review. That way, if Victoria tries to pull rank, she has to prove you're wrong, not just tell you that you are. Marcus felt something settle in his chest. This was real, binding. The kind of protection that meant he wouldn't wake up one morning and find himself fired again because someone in the executive suite decided protocol mattered more than judgment. Ellen flipped to the compensation section. Director of Building Systems. Base salary increase of 32%. Performance bonus structure tied to system uptime metrics. Stock options vesting over 4 years. This is generous, more than generous. They really want you back. Or they're desperate. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She made 2 more marks, then pushed the document across the desk. I'm recommending you sign. The language around decision authority is now airtight. The compensation is fair. And frankly, you've got leverage right now that you'll never have again. Use it. Marcus picked up the pen and signed his name in 3 places. Ellen witnessed each signature, then made copies and slid the original into an envelope addressed to Hale Dynamics Legal Department. Congratulations. You're officially unfireable for anything short of gross negligence or criminal conduct. Marcus stood, shook her hand, and walked out into the cold afternoon. His truck was parked on the street, Emma in the passenger seat doing homework on her tablet. She looked up as he climbed in. Did you get your job back? Yeah, Bug, I got it back. Good. I liked the mean lady better after she stopped being mean. Marcus started the engine and pulled into traffic. Lakeshore Drive stretched north toward home, the water gray and restless on their right. Emma went back to her homework pencil, moving across the screen with the careful precision she brought to everything. His phone buzzed. A text from Garrett. Chicago PD filed formal charges against Cole and Reeves. Federal prosecutors taking over. This is going to trial. Marcus felt a grim satisfaction. Some things couldn't be fixed. They could only be removed, like a cracked beam that threatened the structural integrity of everything around it. Another text, this one from Victoria. Ellen Craft's revisions accepted without negotiation. Legal team signed off this afternoon. Welcome back. Short, professional. Nothing wasted. That was Victoria, efficient even in reconciliation. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he drove north through the city, watching the skyline shrink in his rearview mirror. Emma hummed something under her breath, a melody from a movie they'd watched last week. The heater blew warm air that smelled like the pine air freshener hanging from the mirror. Normal. Ordinary. The kind of moment that felt precious exactly because it wasn't a crisis. Thursday morning arrived cold and clear. The storm system pushed east into Michigan, leaving behind snow packed against building foundations and sidewalks scraped down to concrete. Marcus brought Emma with him, not because of an emergency, but because she'd asked. They entered through the main entrance instead of the service door. The lobby was bright heated to exactly 70 degrees, every system running within optimal parameters. Sandra met them near the elevator bank with a visitor badge on a lanyard and a star-shaped sticker that she handed to Emma without making it a production. Miss Hale is finishing a call. She'll be down in 10 minutes. Emma attached the sticker to her orange coat and wandered toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection small against the vast expanse of glass. Marcus stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at the building around him. The elevator bank running smooth, the lighting at full capacity, the exterior panels properly sealed. His systems. His work. Victoria appeared at 11 minutes past 8. She wore the same dark blazer she'd worn every other time Marcus had seen her, but something in how she carried herself had shifted. Not softer exactly, just more present. Like someone who'd stopped performing an impression of leadership and started actually doing it. She stopped in front of Marcus. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the contract language. Ellen Craft is thorough. A brief pause, the kind that happened when 2 precise people had said what they meant and were deciding whether more was necessary. I'm going to be difficult to work for. Victoria's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. I expect detailed documentation. I ask follow-up questions. I don't move on until I understand something. Marcus met her eyes. That's not difficult. That's competent. But I'm going to read the documentation now. Actually read it, not just check whether the box got ticked. That's all I'd ask. Victoria extended her hand. Marcus shook it, and the gesture felt like more than professional courtesy. It felt like acknowledgement. An agreement between equals that this time they'd both do better. Emma's voice came from the window, impatient and clear. "Are you guys done being professional? I want to see the elevators." Victoria looked at the 8-year-old with something that wasn't quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood. "The elevators are on the east wall, I'll show you." Emma turned around and subjected Victoria to her standard assessment, thorough, unhurried reading for honesty, the way other kids read for comprehension. Whatever she found must have passed muster because she nodded once. They crossed the lobby together, the CEO and the engineer and the girl in the orange coat. Outside, snow caught morning light and turned the sidewalk into scattered diamonds. The building's glass facade reflected winter sky so blue it looked artificial. Marcus watched Victoria explain elevator mechanics to Emma with the kind of patient attention most executives reserved for board presentations. Emma listened, asked questions, absorbed information with the seriousness she brought to everything worth knowing. Victoria answered without condescension, treating an 8-year-old's curiosity like it mattered. The elevator arrived, doors opened. They stepped inside together. Marcus hit the button for 4. Victoria selected 19. Emma pressed 12 just because she could reach it. The elevator climbed. In the polished metal doors, Marcus caught his reflection next to Victoria's. Different heights, different backgrounds, different everything. But both of them standing, both of them still here, both of them willing to try again. The doors opened on 4. Marcus stepped out. "See you later, bug." Emma waved. The doors closed. Marcus walked down the hallway toward the HVAC control room, his boots quiet on industrial carpet that had seen better days. The diagnostic panel showed green across every metric. Heating system at 98% efficiency, the bypass he'd implemented during the crisis, now replaced with proper components. Someone, probably Garrett's team, had ordered the replacement parts and installed them overnight. Professional. Thorough. The way things were supposed to work when people trusted each other to do their jobs right. Marcus spent the morning running diagnostics and checking system logs. Everything that had broken during the sabotage had been repaired or replaced. Everything that had been stressed beyond design parameters had been inspected and cleared for continued operation. The building was whole again. His phone buzzed at 10:30. A text from an unknown number. "This is Patricia Moss. I owe you an apology. What you said at the board meeting was correct. I was trying to replicate James Hale's leadership style instead of recognizing that his style created the vulnerabilities we're now dealing with. I'd like to discuss this further. Are you available for coffee?" Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. Patricia Moss, the board member who'd tried to force Victoria out, was asking him for coffee. The absurdity of it made him want to laugh. He typed back, "I appreciate that, but I'm not the person you need to apologize to." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "You're right, I've already scheduled time with Victoria, but I meant what I said. You saw something the rest of us missed. I'd value your perspective." Marcus pocketed his phone without responding. Patricia Moss could value his perspective all she wanted. He wasn't interested in becoming anyone's advisor or confidant. He had work to do. At 11, he took the stairs down to Sub 2 to inspect the override node where Cole had installed his sabotage device. The relay had been removed, sent to the FBI as evidence. The panel stood open, wiring exposed, waiting for final certification before it could be sealed again. Marcus traced the circuit paths with his flashlight, checking for damage or degradation. Everything looked clean. Cole had been surgical in his sabotage. No unnecessary damage, no collateral destruction. Just the minimum intervention required to cause maximum chaos. Professional in its own perverse way. Footsteps echoed in the corridor behind him. Marcus turned to find Garrett approaching with a tablet and a concerned expression. "We've got a situation." Marcus felt his stomach drop. 3 days of normal operations, and now something else was breaking. "What kind of situation?" "The kind where the FBI wants to interview everyone who had access to Sub 2 in the month before the sabotage. That includes you, me, Beverly, Pete, and about a dozen contractors who did routine maintenance." "When?" "Starting tomorrow. They're setting up in Conference Room B. Voluntary cooperation, but strongly encouraged." Marcus closed the panel and secured the latch. What are they looking for? Anything that suggests Cole and Reeves had help. The relay installation required specialized knowledge. They want to make sure nobody else on our team was involved. Marcus thought about the people he worked with, Pete Calloway, 26, and Ernest, who'd defended the servers with everything he had. Beverly Marsh, who'd found the blueprints in a locked cabinet and stayed calm when everyone else was panicking. Garrett himself, methodical and loyal, who'd given Marcus the tools to cut the relay wires without asking for guarantees. None of them were conspirators. All of them were just trying to do their jobs in a building that had almost collapsed around them. I'll cooperate, whatever they need. Garrett nodded and left. Marcus finished his inspection and headed back upstairs. The building felt different now, not damaged exactly, but marked, like a body that had survived trauma and would always carry the scars. His phone rang. Victoria. I need you in my office. The words were delivered without context or explanation. Marcus changed direction and headed for the elevator. 19 floors up, he stepped out into the executive suite where he'd been fired 4 days ago. Victoria's office door stood open. She sat behind her desk, a tablet in front of her, and an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. Not angry, not worried. Something else. Close the door. He did. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. He sat. The FBI is interviewing our staff about the sabotage. Garrett told me. There's something you should know before they talk to you. Something I found in Thomas Reeves's communications. She turned the tablet around. On the screen, an email dated 6 weeks ago, sender Thomas Reeves, recipient Richard Cole. The Reed situation needs to be handled carefully. He's the only one who truly understands the infrastructure. If we push him out before executing the plan, we lose our advantage. Better to keep him in place until the last possible moment, then create a justification for termination that Victoria can't ignore. The safety audit violation will work. She's rigid enough about protocol to make the decision we need her to make. Marcus read it twice. The words landed like physical blows. They'd set him up, not just for termination, but specifically timed to maximize the chaos when the sabotage triggered. Thomas Reeves had engineered the safety audit, found the violation that Marcus had documented and explained, and positioned it to Victoria as evidence of recklessness rather than judgment. And Victoria, thinking she was enforcing necessary standards, had done exactly what they needed her to do. I'm sorry. Victoria's voice was quiet. I didn't see it. I should have. I was so focused on proving I could lead without exceptions that I missed the manipulation completely. Marcus sat back in the chair, his mind working through implications. The firing hadn't been about protocol violations. It had been a calculated move to remove the one person who could fix the building when it broke. Thomas and Cole had known Marcus would be in the parking lot trying to start his truck when the power failed. They'd counted on Victoria's pride preventing her from asking him back quickly enough. They'd just underestimated how much Victoria was capable of setting pride aside when it mattered. You couldn't have known. I could have listened. I could have read your documentation instead of just seeing a protocol violation. I could have trusted 4 years of competent work over one incident that made me uncomfortable. Marcus looked at her, really looked, and saw someone carrying guilt that wasn't entirely hers to carry. You're going to have to let this go eventually. Beating yourself up doesn't fix anything. I know, but I'm not ready to let it go yet. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside the windows, Chicago spread out in all directions, the lake a dark line on the eastern horizon. The FBI is going to ask me about this email. Victoria nodded. Probably. They're building a conspiracy case. This is evidence that the sabotage was more sophisticated than just cutting power. They manipulated personnel decisions, created vulnerabilities, positioned assets exactly where they needed them. And I was one of those assets. You were the only asset that mattered. Without you, the building would have stayed dark. The deal would have collapsed. Stratford would have moved in. Everything Thomas and Cole planned would have worked. Marcus stood and walked to the window. From this height, his truck in the parking structure was invisible, just one vehicle among hundreds. He thought about Emma sitting in that truck watching her tablet while her father's world fell apart around him. He thought about Victoria climbing into the driver's seat and trying to figure out how to talk to an 8-year-old she'd just terrified. He thought about second chances and how fragile they were and how easily everything could have gone a different way. "I'll tell the FBI everything I know, if it helps build the case good. Those two shouldn't walk away from this." Victoria moved to stand beside him at the window. "For what it's worth, I'm glad they failed. Not just because of the company. Because you deserved better than being used as a pawn in someone else's game." Marcus glanced at her. She was staring out at the city, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "We all deserved better. You included." The afternoon passed in routine maintenance checks and system monitoring. Marcus welcomed the monotony. After days of crisis, normal problems felt like a gift. A stuck valve here, a temperature variance there, the kind of issues that could be fixed with tools and patience instead of desperate improvisation. At 3 o'clock, his phone buzzed. A text from Emma routed through Sandra. "Miss Victoria said I can come to your office. Can I?" Marcus smiled and typed back, "Come on up, 4th floor, room 412. 5 minutes later, Emma appeared in the doorway of the HVAC control room, Sandra trailing behind her. "Dad, this building is really complicated. That's why it takes a whole team to keep it running." Emma wandered over to the diagnostic panel, her eyes scanning the readouts with the kind of focused attention she brought to anything mechanical or systematic. "What's this number? Pressure differential in the heating distribution system. We want it between 22 and 28 psi. Right now it's at 25, which is perfect. And this one, backup generator fuel level. We keep it at 90% or higher in case the main power grid fails again." Emma absorbed this with a thoughtful expression. "You really did save everybody, didn't you?" Marcus crouched down to her level. "I helped. But a lot of people saved everybody. Miss Victoria Garrett, Pete Beverly, even Sandra, who stayed with you so I could work. It wasn't just me." Emma considered this with her usual seriousness. "But you knew what to do. The rest of them needed you to know." The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Marcus had been the linchpin not because he was smarter or braver, but because he had the specific knowledge that the crisis required. Without him, all the good intentions and hard work in the world wouldn't have been enough. That kind of irreplaceability should have felt satisfying. Instead, it just felt heavy. His phone buzzed. Victoria again. "Can you come to the lobby? There's someone here who wants to talk to you." Marcus left Emma with Sandra and took the stairs down. The lobby was busy with afternoon foot traffic, people returning from lunch, deliveries being signed for visitors checking in at the reception desk. Victoria stood near the elevators with a woman Marcus didn't recognize. As he got closer, recognition clicked into place. Caroline Brandt, lead attorney for Meridian Capital, the woman who'd almost walked away from the deal when she learned about the sabotage. "Mr. Reed," her handshake was firm, professional, "I wanted to thank you personally. What you did during the power outage was extraordinary, and what you said during the signing that took courage. Most people would have tried to hide the truth. You told it anyway." Marcus felt uncomfortable under the praise. "I just answered your questions." "No. You took responsibility when it would have been easier to deflect. You made it possible for me to trust that this company was worth the investment." She pulled a business card from her portfolio and handed it to him. "If you ever decide you want to do something other than building maintenance, call me. Meridian is always looking for people with integrity and technical expertise." Marcus pocketed the card without looking at it. "I appreciate that, but I like what I do." Caroline smiled. "I thought you might say that. Still, the offer stands." She shook hands with Victoria and left. Marcus watched her go, then turned to find Victoria studying him with an expression he couldn't quite parse. "You could have taken that seriously. Meridian would pay you twice what I can. I don't need twice what you pay me. I need to do work that matters. Building maintenance matters. Keeping people safe matters. Fixing things that break matters. Being good at something useful matters. The rest is just noise." Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Recognition, maybe, or just appreciation for someone who understood that value wasn't always measured in salary numbers and stock options. I'm grateful you feel that way, because I'm going to need you here. For what? Restructuring. The board gave me 1 week to prove I can lead differently than my father did. That means changing how we operate, how we make decisions, how we treat the people who actually keep this building running. I can't do that without someone who understands what actually matters versus what just sounds good in a boardroom. Marcus felt the weight of the request settle over him. I'm an engineer. I fix infrastructure. I'm not a management consultant. I don't need a management consultant. I need someone who'll tell me the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Someone who won't let me make decisions based on pride or protocol or what my father would have done. Someone I can trust. The word trust hung in the air between them. 4 days ago they'd had none. Now Victoria was asking him to help reshape the company her father built. I'll do what I can, but I'm still going to be honest about what I know and what I don't. If you ask me something outside my expertise, I'm going to tell you that. That's exactly what I want. Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression tightened. Board meeting in 30 minutes. Patricia wants to discuss the restructuring proposal. This is where things get difficult. Marcus watched her straighten her shoulders, the professional armor sliding back into place. Whatever vulnerability she'd shown in her office was gone now, replaced by the controlled competence that let her walk into rooms full of people who wanted her job and come out still standing. You'll do fine. How do you know? Because you're not trying to be your father anymore. You're just trying to do what's right. That's harder, but it's also more honest. Victoria held his gaze for a moment, then nodded and headed for the elevators. Marcus went back upstairs to collect Emma and finish his shift. The week passed in a rhythm of normal operations, punctuated by abnormal conversations. The FBI interviews ran Monday through Wednesday, methodical and thorough agents with notepads asking the same questions in slightly different ways to see if the answers stayed consistent. Marcus told them everything: the relay device, the override node, the honeypot he'd built to trap Thomas Reeves's cyber attack. They listened, took notes, and gave away nothing. Thursday brought news that Richard Cole had accepted a plea deal. In exchange for testimony against Thomas Reeves, he'd serve 8 years instead of 20. The federal prosecutor handling the case called it a strategic necessity. Marcus called it insufficient, but probably the best they'd get. Friday afternoon, Victoria convened a company-wide meeting in the auditorium on the 3rd floor. Marcus stood in the back with Garrett and Pete watching employees file in: building services staff, IT personnel, administrative assistants, legal team members, executives from floors Marcus had never visited. Victoria took the stage without notes or slides, just her and a microphone and 200 people waiting to hear what came next. 4 days ago, this company almost collapsed. Not because of market forces or bad strategy, but because 2 men in positions of trust decided their personal interests mattered more than the institution they were supposed to serve. Her voice carried through the auditorium, clear and steady. Richard Cole and Thomas Reeves are in federal custody facing criminal charges. They will not be returning. Their positions are being eliminated, not filled. We're restructuring to eliminate the concentration of power that made their conspiracy possible. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Victoria let them settle before continuing. Going forward, building operations and infrastructure will report directly to me. Safety decisions will be made by the people who understand the technical realities, not overruled by executives who prioritize policy over judgment. And anyone in this company, regardless of title or tenure, who sees something wrong will have a direct line to report it without fear of retaliation. She paused, and Marcus saw her take a breath. I'm also changing how I lead. My father built this company through certainty and control. That worked for him. But it also created blind spots that nearly destroyed us. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to ask for help. I'm going to trust the people who've earned that trust and admit when I'm wrong. If you can't work in that environment, I respect that. But this is the company we're building now. The auditorium was silent. Then from somewhere in the middle rows, someone started clapping. It spread slowly at first, then building into something that sounded like relief mixed with cautious hope. Victoria's eyes found Marcus in the back of the room. He nodded once. She nodded back. The meeting ended. Employees filed out conversations starting before they'd even left the auditorium. Marcus waited until the room cleared, then approached the stage where Victoria stood collecting her thoughts. That was good. That was terrifying. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Victoria smiled, and it looked genuine. No, I suppose they're not. They walked out together through hallways Marcus could navigate blindfolded, past systems he'd built and maintained and defended. The building felt different now, not just repaired but somehow more solid, like something that had been tested and proven capable of withstanding pressure. Saturday morning arrived quiet and cold. Marcus spent it at home with Emma making pancakes and watching her do homework at the kitchen table. Normal. Ordinary. The kind of day that felt precious exactly because nothing was breaking. His phone buzzed at 10. A text from Victoria. I owe Emma an apology. Would today work? I don't want this to wait. Marcus showed the message to Emma. The lady from your work wants to say sorry to me. Emma looked up from her math worksheet, expression thoughtful. Is she going to mean it or just say it because she's supposed to? I think she means it. Okay, but I want to finish my homework first. It's rude to leave things half done. Marcus smiled and typed back, this afternoon work, Emma wants to finish her homework first. 3 dots appeared. Of course, 2 p.m. at the coffee shop on Clark Street, I'll buy her hot chocolate. Marcus confirmed and pocketed his phone. Emma went back to her math pencil, moving across the page with careful precision. She was working through long division, showing her work in neat columns that would make any teacher proud. At 1:30 they climbed into the truck and headed south toward the city. Emma wore her orange coat and the star-shaped visitor sticker she'd refused to remove. Marcus had given up trying to explain that stickers weren't meant to be permanent. The coffee shop was warm and crowded, afternoon light streaming through windows that faced the street. Victoria sat in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a cup of something that steamed. She stood when they approached. Emma, thank you for coming. Emma slid into the booth with the seriousness she brought to any significant occasion. Marcus sat beside her. Victoria sat across, and for a moment nobody spoke. Then Victoria leaned forward, her eyes level with Emma's. I scared you on Monday morning. I was angry at your dad for something that wasn't his fault, and I took that anger out on him in front of you. That was wrong. You shouldn't have had to see that. Emma listened with the same focused attention she gave to homework and elevator mechanics. Did you mean to be mean, or did you just not know how not to be? The question hit like a scalpel, precise and cutting. Victoria's expression shifted surprise, then something that might have been recognition. I didn't know how not to be. I thought being strong meant never showing uncertainty or kindness. Your dad taught me that strength can look different than that. Emma absorbed this. He's good at teaching things. He taught me how to tie my shoes and how fractions work and why being honest is better than being polite. Victoria's eyes moved to Marcus, then back to Emma. He's good at a lot of things. I'm sorry I didn't see that sooner. Emma nodded slowly. Okay, I accept your apology. But if you're mean to my dad again, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. The formality of the phrasing, very disappointed, made Marcus want to smile. Emma had picked that up from her second-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who deployed it with devastating effectiveness. Victoria's face remained serious. I understand. I'll try to deserve your non-disappointment. Emma smiled, then small but genuine, and the tension in the booth evaporated like steam. A barista brought hot chocolate with whipped cream piled so high it defied physics. Emma attacked it with the focus she brought to everything worth doing. Victoria ordered a refill on her coffee. Marcus just watched, thinking about how strange the world was that a week ago this meeting would have been impossible, and now it felt almost normal. Can I ask you something? Emma's question was directed at Victoria, who nodded. Did you fire my dad because you were scared? Victoria went very still. Marcus felt his chest tighten. 8 years old and already seeing through armor that most adults couldn't penetrate. Yes, I was scared that if I admitted he was right and I was wrong, people would think I was weak. I thought being a good leader meant never being wrong. But everybody's wrong sometimes. That's how you learn things. You're absolutely right. It took me too long to figure that out. Emma considered this while working on her hot chocolate. My dad says people can't go back and fix the past. But you can fix today. And if you fix enough todays, eventually, you have a different past. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. Recognition maybe of her own words coming back through a child's interpretation. Your dad is very wise. I know. He learned it from being wrong a lot when he was younger. He told me mistakes are just lessons that hurt. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He'd said that to Emma 2 years ago after he'd forgotten her parent-teacher conference and had to explain why being reliable mattered. She'd remembered. Of course she'd remembered. Emma forgot nothing. They stayed another hour. Emma finished her hot chocolate and started drawing on napkins the Hale Dynamics tower rendered in ballpoint pen windows, precise proportions surprisingly accurate for an 8-year-old working from memory. Victoria asked questions about the drawing. Emma answered with the casual expertise of someone who'd spent hours studying the building while her father worked. At 4, Marcus checked his watch. We should head home. Emma gathered her napkins, carefully stacking them like they mattered. Victoria walked them to the door. Thank you for giving me a chance to make this right. Emma looked up at her. You're welcome. I think you're getting better at not being mean. Victoria's smile was small, but real. I'm trying. They drove home through afternoon traffic, Emma quiet in the passenger seat. Halfway there, she spoke up. I like her better now. Yeah. She's still kind of scary, but the good kind of scary. Like a teacher who makes you work hard but wants you to succeed. Marcus thought about that Victoria as the good kind of scary. Demanding but fair. High standards but genuine support. It was probably the most generous assessment Victoria Hale had received in years. You're very wise, Bug. I know. I get it from you. The week that followed felt like learning to walk on ground that had shifted underfoot. Victoria restructured the operations hierarchy, eliminating 2 VP positions and redistributing responsibilities to teams instead of individuals. She instituted weekly technical reviews where engineering staff could raise concerns directly to executive leadership. She approved budget increases for preventive maintenance and training. Marcus attended the first technical review on Tuesday. 15 people around a conference table, from HVAC specialists to network engineers to building services coordinators. Victoria sat at the head tablet in front of her, asking questions that demonstrated she'd actually read the briefing materials. When Pete Calloway raised concerns about outdated server infrastructure, Victoria didn't dismiss it or defer it. She asked for specifics, listened to the technical explanation, and approved the upgrade on the spot. How long will implementation take? Pete looked startled that he'd gotten this far. 4 weeks if we phase it properly. 6 if we try to rush and something breaks. 4 weeks. Do it right. Marcus can building systems support a 4-week phased implementation without service interruption. Marcus pulled up the schedule on his tablet. Yes, we'll need to coordinate around the scheduled maintenance windows, but it's feasible. Good. Pete, submit the final proposal by end of week. Let's move forward. The meeting continued. Every concern got heard. Every technical judgment got respected. Every decision got made based on reality instead of policy. Afterward, Garrett caught up with Marcus in the hallway. Is she actually different, or is this just performance until the board votes? Marcus thought about Victoria crouching in a coffee shop to apologize to an 8-year-old, about her admitting fear in front of the entire company, about the way she'd changed the contract language without negotiation because Ellen Kraft was right and Victoria was willing to acknowledge it. She's actually different. Whether it sticks, that's the real question. The board meeting happened Thursday. Marcus wasn't present, but Sandra texted him updates. Patricia moving to approve restructuring plan. David Chen seconding. Vote passing 7-2. Victoria keeping her position, unanimous. Marcus felt something unclench in his chest. Victoria had bought herself time. What she did with it would determine whether this transformation was real or just a temporary adaptation to crisis. Friday evening, Marcus was locking up the HVAC control room when his phone rang. "Victoria, are you still in the building?" "Just finishing up. Can you come to my office? There's something I want to show you." He took the stairs to 19 legs, protesting after a long week. Victoria's door stood open, warm light spilling into the hallway. She sat at her desk, but the tablet in front of her showed something unexpected: architectural drawings. "I'm proposing an expansion. 3 floors added to the top of the building. New server infrastructure, updated HVAC systems, modern workspace design. The Meridian acquisition gives us the capital to do it right." Marcus moved closer, studying the drawings. The proposed systems were state-of-the-art redundant power distribution, modular heating zones, integrated monitoring that would flag problems before they became failures. "This is ambitious. I want you to lead the infrastructure design, full authority, your specifications, your team selection, your timeline. I'll approve the budget, but the technical decisions are yours." Marcus felt the weight of the offer settle over him. This wasn't just facility management. This was architecture, design, building something new instead of just maintaining what already existed. "Why me?" "Because you understand that systems aren't just about efficiency metrics. They're about keeping people safe, about building things that last, about knowing when to follow protocol and when to trust judgment instead." She paused. "And because you're the only person I trust to do this without letting ego or politics interfere with doing it right." Marcus looked at the drawings again. Clean lines, thoughtful integration systems designed to support each other instead of just coexisting in the same space. This was the kind of project engineers dreamed about, the kind that came along maybe once in a career. "I'll need to bring in consultants, specialists who understand high-rise construction and environmental systems integration. This is beyond what I can do alone. Hire whoever you need. Show me the org chart and budget proposal by end of month." Marcus nodded slowly. "Okay, I'm in." Victoria smiled, and it reached her eyes. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that." He left her office and took the elevator down, mind already spinning through possibilities. Emma would be home with Mrs. Gerhardt by now, probably doing homework or watching something educational on her tablet. Normal Friday evening. Ordinary life. Except now Marcus had a project that would reshape the skyline and define his career, and he had a CEO who trusted him enough to give him that opportunity. The world was strange like that. One week you were fired and desperate, the next week you were designing the future. Marcus stepped out into the cold evening air and walked to his truck. The Hale Dynamics tower rose behind him, every window lit, every system running, every floor warm and occupied and alive. He'd saved it once. Now he'd help it grow. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking structure into traffic that flowed south toward home. Tomorrow he'd start sketching preliminary designs. Tomorrow he'd research consultants and specialists and the kind of cutting-edge systems that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. But tonight he'd make dinner with Emma and listen to her talk about school and read her a bedtime story and be grateful for normal. Because sometimes normal was the most extraordinary thing you could have, and sometimes the people you saved ended up saving you right back.